Today's edition of Mac Voices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, PDF Pen for iPad and iPhone, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPad and iPhone, Text Expander Touch, and Disk Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. And by the Mac Voices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, to stay up to date on all the Mac Voices news. Subscribe from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we're back with another Take Control update, another Take Control author. This one, I think, applies to just about all of us because probably just about all of us use iTunes. Kirk McElhearn is here. He's just updated Take Control of iTunes 12, the FAQ, to version, Kirk, is it 1.2?
It's version 1.2. It's the second update since iTunes 12 was released.
Great. So it's version 1.2. And I'm really anxious to hear from you to see if you are satisfied with this update, because I know you've been kind of a harsh critic of iTunes of late, and I know this changes things, hopefully, for the better.
I'm pretty positive about this upgrade to iTunes. So iTunes 12.4 that came out in May, it's not a major update. It's not iTunes 13. And by the way, will we ever see iTunes 13? That kind of bodes ill, doesn't it?
Didn't think about that.
But it is a major point update, a major dot update. And what it's done is it's maintained most of the structure of iTunes, but it's simplified a lot of the navigation, and it's brought back, I would say, the venerable interface element that iTunes 12 mostly got rid of, which is the sidebar. If you look on Google Images for a screenshot of iTunes 1, you'll see it had that sidebar at the left, and it had that song list at the right. It had what's called the iTunes LCD at the top. That's the little bit that gives you information about what's playing. The play buttons are up at the top left, and that overall structure has never changed. With iTunes 12, the sidebar was removed unless you were in playlists view, but now it's back all the time. You can still hide it. You probably don't want to, but now it's back. I call it the nexus of the iTunes navigation now.
And my limited experience with it so far, and by the way, folks, we should say that we're recording this a little bit before WWDC because of Kirk's schedule, so there may be an extra supplement to come out, so just to keep things in perspective here. But it feels like the sidebar has become almost a little bit contextual. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it is. Just to rebound on the WWDC statement, nothing in iTunes will change at WWDC, but it's possible that Apple Music will change, and that would be reflected in the way you navigate and use Apple Music within iTunes. But this is a major enough update that Apple's not going to just pull out another one a month later and say, hey, you know what, guys, we changed this, but we shouldn't have. So you can count on what you're seeing. We're recording this at the end of May, and whenever this airs, what you're seeing now is what you saw in May when 12.4 came out. The sidebar is contextual. Yeah, if you look at the top of the sidebar, you have information about the media library that you're looking at. Now, before, in iTunes 12, before 12.4, you had little icons at the top left for the different kinds of media. You had a little icon for music, for movies, TV shows. And that's been replaced by a menu that Apple calls the media picker. So you click on this menu and you choose music, movie, audiobooks, whatever. And what you see at the top of the sidebar changes depending on which type of media you're looking at. If you're looking at music, you see things like artists, albums, genres, so different views of your content. If you look at other media, you'll see different things. You'll see we're going to just do this live, and we're going to switch right now. If you look at movies, you see movies, genres, and home video. If you look at TV shows, you see TV shows, episodes, and genres. If you look at podcasts, you see podcasts and stations, etc. So it is contextual. Another thing that's interesting is there is actually there's a menu at the top of iTunes in the menu bar. And when you're in the music library, the menu is called Song. This is after the Edit menu before the View menu. If you change to movies, that menu changes to movie. If you change to TV shows, that menu changes to TV show. And this may be the only app that I've seen where you actually have a menu in the menu bar that is contextual. In other words, the name of the menu changes depending on what you're looking at. It's common to have a contextual menu when you right click, and the menu items in that menu will change. But here it's actually the name of the menu. Now, this named menu duplicates the contextual menu. So if you right click on something, you see a little menu and you see exactly the same menu items in that named menu in the menu bar.
Okay, and folks, if that sounds like a little too confusing, just go and check it, and it'll start to make perfect sense.
Yeah.
Which is sort of what strikes me so much, Kirk. It feels like so much of this makes sense. Before, you had to struggle a little bit to understand it, but now it goes back to feeling like some of what we were used to. But yet now it addresses all the different kind of medias that iTunes has been trying to manage all this time, and it just feels like it's more intuitive.
It does, and just to give an example, my Take Control of iTunes 12 book, I've got the manuscript open in front of me, and the editing's not finished. This is going to change. If I'm not mistaken, it was 259 pages in the previous version. And I'm looking at it now after I've done all of my changes, waiting for Tanya Enks to edit it, and it's 261 pages. Yet I've added probably about 8 pages. So what I've been able to do is cut out all these convoluted explanations I had to give about how to get someplace in iTunes. Click this button, then click that button, then click that menu and choose this and go over here and choose that, and stand up and turn around 3 times. So while I've added a number of pages, I've taken out almost as much as I've added because iTunes is a bit simpler to manage.
So does this mean that somebody's been at Apple has been listening, or do you think this has been in the works for a while and it's not just a knee-jerk reaction to a lot of vitriol that we've been seeing?
Well, iTunes 12 came out, in October 2014? So it's a year and a half old. It's a little more than a year and a half old. It's obvious that it's obvious that Apple pays attention to the criticism they get. A lot of it, they shrug and just say whatever because it's criticism that isn't valid. But the criticism about iTunes, and particularly the way you navigate, I wouldn't say it was unanimous, but pretty much most people, at least in our sort of tech journalism world, most people agreed that it was confusing. And I get emails from readers all the time, readers of the book and my columns on Macworld. How do I do this? How do I do that? So I know very well that even for average users, people unlike us who, you look behind Chuck and you see all the stuff there, you know what kind of computer user he is. I rib you about this every time.
Sure, I'm sure.
But it's not just us who think a lot about this, who are confused. It's average users. And I'm guessing, this is really just a guess, that Apple started paying, that the higher-ups in Apple, and I'm thinking Eddie Q is the one who's really in charge of iTunes overall, started paying attention to some of this and saying, we're getting all this criticism. Maybe there's something valid in it. Let's look at how we can fix this. Now, I'm not saying that they read all my articles on Macworld and that they follow my website religiously, even though I'm sure there are plenty of people at Apple who do. Because, again, the criticisms that I've had are criticisms that were shared by an awful lot of other people writing about iTunes. And this isn't the iTunes must die criticism. I've never been one of those people. I don't advocate splitting it up into multiple apps. I think we talked about that on a previous podcast. I've always been very realistic, understanding that iTunes makes sense as a single unit, but that it needs to be improved. So I'm really delighted with the changes they've made. There are still some glitches and problems, and there are still some things that aren't entirely easy to understand, but I give it a big thumbs up.
I agree with you on so many things here. I get the impression that up to this point, that Apple continues to push that minimalist look, and that thing where the fewer things we have on screen or in the app, the better from an appearance standpoint. Things aren't like progress bars or progress indicators. They're not empty when nothing's going on. They're just not there, and that that's okay. Right up to the point where I wonder if something's going on or isn't going on, and I've forgotten where to look. And especially if nothing is going on, then there's no progress indicator. And what happened? Am I really downloading anything, or do I just think I'm downloading something? So I'm kind of happy to see it, shift back a little bit. I don't want, and I'm hoping we don't go back to, a million dials and switches and indicators and everything, but I do think you can go just a little bit too minimalist, to the point that it starts to degrade the experience and not provide you what you need to use the product.
Yeah, if it's too hard to find what you want, then you've gone too far. And again, in the previous versions of iTunes 12, so 12, 12.1, 12.2, there were all those buttons all over the place and menus. And my feeling when iTunes 12 first came out was that it was designed by the marketing department, that everything was designed to get you to the iTunes store to buy music. Now, we've seen a big shift since then with Apple Music, that streaming is maybe not overtaken downloads yet, but it's on its way. For some labels, streaming makes more money than downloads, but overall, I think downloads are still bigger. So Apple is looking to the future here, maybe not forcing people into the iTunes store as much. I think that when iTunes 12 came out, certain people were involved in the design, and with this latest update, other people were involved in the design. You can't overhaul an app like this that's used by hundreds of millions of people. You can't totally change it overnight, but you can do these small changes. I'll cite one small change that I really find excellent. They're the little back and forward buttons that are up at the top left of the window. You're moving around in iTunes from one view to another, from music to movies to the store, and you want to get back where you were a while ago. I was looking at this album, how do I get back? You just click the back button, like on your web browser. And it's something that everyone knows how to use because we use web browsers. It's a very intuitive control, and it makes it easier to not get lost and get frustrated and think, how did I get here? How do I get out?
I don't want to ask you to do a laundry list here of all the changes, obviously, and we've talked about navigation. The little back button is a perfect example. What are some of the other things that just make you happy about this update and you feel like maybe we've shifted over and we're back on the right track?
Well, I would say that the main change is this reduction of the number of buttons that you would have on top, what's called the navigation bar. So if you're looking at iTunes, you've got a toolbar on top. The iTunes LCD is the bit in the middle that gives information. Below that, you've got a white navigation bar, and then below that, you have the actual content, the sidebar, or a window showing your playlist, or whatever. So they've wiped a lot off that navigation bar, and in particular, there was a menu at the right, which was a view options menu, which is gone. Up to iTunes 12, view options was one of those little windows, the ones with the tiny window bar, like an info window in the Finder. Or like the view options window in the Finder. So that's back. It's a window now. You press Command J and you display that. If you use iTunes in any kind of list form and you've ever wanted to change which columns display in the list, it was easy to do in that window. Click, 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 click on the columns you wanted to show or hide. But with the menu that they had before, it was click, scroll down to a submenu, click, select the submenu, click the column you want, and then it goes away. So if you wanted to do another one, it was click, 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 and it goes away. So it simplified all the view options into a menu that just sits there, and you can leave it floating all the time if you want. So it's one of those windows that stays in the front. It's not technically a palette, right? I'm not sure what the name of this kind of window is. But that's a wonderful return to the past. It's a change, but a change to something that we had in the past. Now, there's a bit of a negative change. If you look at the top of the sidebar, you have a recently added entry. So you click that, and I'm just going to go and look at my music, and I've got music. I've got 240 albums, and that's what I've added since, let's see, the oldest one was added in late February, so 3 months ago. So I've added 240 albums since then, in part because I've re-ripped a bunch of CDs. And those who want to know about re-ripping, Chuck will maybe put in the show notes a link to the episode we did about lossless files and re-ripping and all that. Now, previously, you had a recently added section at the top of Artist View, Albums View, etc. And now it's only its own view. And the problem here is you can only view it as albums, and you can't change the scope. So I've got about 3 months of recently added music, but I can't just show 1 month or 6 months. I can't make it a song list. I can't view it by artist. I can only view it by albums, and I can't even change the size of the artwork. So that's a bit of a negative. Now, of course, you can make a recently added playlist. I explain how to do that in the book. By default, iTunes has a recently added playlist if you haven't deleted it. So there are other ways you can get to your recent music. Here's a small change which is actually kind of interesting, and you were saying how the sidebar is contextual. So I'm looking at my music. At the top, you've got the library section, and it shows the different ways you can view your content. And below that, you have a playlist section, and it currently says Music Playlists. Now, if I click that, I can choose all playlists to show all the playlists for all the content I have. Now, you may have playlists with TV shows or movies or audiobooks or whatever. You may have mixed playlists. You can choose either to segregate your playlist for content. So when you're in your movies library, you only see playlists where you have movies. Or you can show all playlists, no matter which kind of content you're looking for. And that's a nice change because it allows you to simplify a bit of what's displaying, again, contextually. I think one of the big words here is contextual. And as we've seen, there's a contextual menu, the library column is contextual, and this playlist, I guess playlists library you could call it, is contextual as well. So that's a very nice change too.
Yeah, the contextual thing to me feels like something I'm with you. I'm not exactly one of the iTunes must-die guys, but it's never made a lot of sense to me why there seem to be so many controls and so many overlapping things, with the exception of movies and TV shows and video, which is sort of kind of, it could be its own category. Why don't you just click a tab or a button or select a menu or whatever, and now you're in music and audio, and then over here you're in video with those three subsections. And then if they want to keep the podcasts in, which they've rolled that up to a separate app, but you go to podcast, have it all in the same framework, have a common set of controls or a common set of metaphors, but just make them pretty clearly delineated and stop trying to mix it up. And I feel like, again, this moves in that direction or moves back in that direction, depending on where you are.
Yeah, so here's another change that I think is good. If you remember, prior to iTunes, well, from iTunes 12 to iTunes 12.3, there was a little store menu in the toolbar. You'd have a little round icon with a head and shoulders thing, and when you're signed in, it would have your name. Now, that was just another piece of clutter because it's not something you need to use very often. So they've replaced that with a menu that says Account, and you click that, it's View My Account, Sign Out, Wish List, Purchase, Check for Available Downloads, etc. Putting a menu back in the menu bar doesn't seem radical, but taking it out of the toolbar is fixing what I would consider to be a mistake. That there's no logical reason you have that in the toolbar to distract people when it's a menu that they weren't using that often. So that I think is a positive change. Some more negative changes are, well, I wouldn't say so much negative, but there are menu items that have been moved. So for instance, if you want to update your iCloud Music Library or Genius, you used to have to do that in the store menu, the one that was in the toolbar, and now it's in the File Library sub-menu. So you've got to go down 2 levels. Now, anyone who doesn't know this, on OS X, you click the Help button, the Help menu in the menu bar, and you get a little search field. And if you're looking for a specific menu item, just type its name, and the menu displays with a little blue arrow and shows you exactly where it is. So if you're looking for, the Genius menu, click Help, type Genius in search, and you'll find exactly where it is. A lot of people have been writing me and mentioning on Twitter, oh, where did they put this menu? I can't find it. But if you just look a little bit, it's not that hard. And this is a wonderful help feature that Apple added 10.4, 10.5. I mean, it's been around for a while. I wonder how many people are actually aware of this.
This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of world-class software like PDF Pen for Mac, PDF Pen Pro for Mac, PDF Pen for iPhone and iPad, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, Text Expander for Mac, and Text Expander for iPhone and iPad. PDF Pen is one of those rare apps that's an essential for the Mac, iPhone, and iPad. Why? Because when it comes to PDF, you really need to be able to perform the PDF Pen magic no matter what device you're working on. With PDF Pen, you can read PDFs, correct PDFs, mark up and annotate PDFs with notes or drawings, sign and fill out PDF forms, scan and OCR PDFs and turn them into editable documents, add, delete, combine, or number pages. The list goes on and on. Step up to PDF Pen Pro and you get the option to make whole websites into PDFs, create and edit forms, export the contents of PDFs to Microsoft Excel or PowerPoint, and more. If you're on the go more than you're at your desk, then PDF Pen for iPhone and iPad puts PDF Pen Power in your pocket. Edit and mark up PDFs while you're on the way to the airport, edit, combine, and delete pages while you're at the gate, or use your iPad Pro and Apple Pencil to add text, remove, or fix typos while you're on the plane. iCloud and Dropbox Sync make sure that whatever work you do in one location is available at every other location. And PDF Pen's redacting feature means that when you delete sensitive information, it's really deleted, not just painted over. You need to check out PDF Pen right now and take control of your PDFs. The best way to do that is to visit smilesoftware.com and download a free trial of PDF Pen and find out why you need it. Then, buy direct from Smile or find PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro in the Mac App Store. PDF Pen, just one of the world-class productivity tools from Smile at smilesoftware.com. Thanks to Smile for being the longest-running sponsor of MacVoices. Kirk, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I've gotten a couple of the questions, not nearly the volume you do, of course, trying to find things, and I've gone looking for things myself. I almost feel like I'm having to get into the mindset that I do when I talk to people who are moving from Windows over to the Mac, that it used to be all these steps and it used to be kind of convoluted. Just kind of go with your gut as to where you think it should be. Forget where it was or how you got there. Just where should it be? And oh yeah, okay, it's right there. Now that's not going to work in every case, but it seems to for me personally to be working in a lot of the cases. That okay, you were talking about taking things out of the book. You know, the convoluted instructions.
Yeah.
I'm kind of taking that out of my head and saying, okay, where should it be? And it's there. And I love that. I think that's a huge step forward.
Yeah, I mean, you're always relearning. It's like if you get a new car, you're going to relearn where the controls are. It's the same thing with this, but I think overall they're positive. I'll give you another example of what I consider a very subtle interface change that is an improvement. If you're looking at your iTunes screen, you look up at the top. Again, the iTunes LCD is that bit with the info in the middle. To the right of it, you have an Up Next button, and to the left of it, you have an AirPlay button. They're nice and balanced. They're symmetrical. They're both sort of light gray buttons on a dark gray background. Previously, the Up Next was an icon in the iTunes LCD, and the AirPlay button was an icon on the toolbar. So it didn't have that background. It was just the black against the toolbar. I don't understand why they did it that way in the first place. But when you look at it now, it's like, of course, that's how it should be. You know, they're balanced, they're symmetrical, they're the same width, and each one you click and something happens. It just makes sense.
It's so nice to be able to have this conversation when you feel like that your things have moved in a positive direction. Because it seemed like some of our past discussions were you really need to buy Kirk's book because you got to figure out how it got screwed up and you still want to be able to do it. And now it feels like you need to buy Kirk's book because you want to take advantage of all the features and maybe move to the next level as opposed to just playing catch up.
Yeah, my book is, this is the fruit of several years of different editions of this book, and God, 15 years writing about iTunes, more or less, since my first iTunes article in Macworld. It's not just about using iTunes 12.4. It's about using iTunes. It's about managing a music library. I talk about, I mentioned the podcast we did a while ago about lossless files and bit rates and all that. I talk about that in the book. I talk about tagging files, why you should tag them and the best way to do it. I talk about ripping CDs. There are people who rip CDs. They're not all people with gray on top of their head like us. So the approach of the book was to say this is all you need to think about when you're managing your media library. It's not just about, hey, make a playlist and download some music. I go from A to Z, and you'll find that if you read the book, you'll read through it once, and there's a lot of stuff you won't need to read a second time, but there's an awful lot that you'll go back, you'll use it as a reference book when you're using a feature that you're unfamiliar with. I don't know, you're using home sharing to share a library in your house, and maybe if you've never done it before, that's the kind of thing you want to go back and learn how it works. But once you've read about ripping CDs, different file formats, that's the kind of sort of foundational material that you won't need again. But it's all there to give people a full overview of what it takes to really understand iTunes.
What's this gray like us?
Yeah, up there.
That's blonde. That's blonde.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. It's the color.
It's the lighting.
It's the white balance on your video camera.
It's the lighting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, people who are old enough to have grown up with vinyl. Okay. I think that's the dividing point. If you grew up with CDs, you're already in a different mindset. We grew up with vinyl and cassettes. We recorded some of our albums to cassette to listen on Walkman. Heck, when I was young, I had one of those little tiny record players, little plastic ones. So, we've lived through a number of changes. If you're my son's age, my son is 25, he grew up with CDs and moved to downloads, and it's a different mindset. I've probably said this on your show once before, and I say it a lot. There was a period in my life where I was like those guys in the movie High Fidelity in the record store. Mm-hmm. So, we grew up at a time when you could hang out in record stores. We grew up at a time where there were record stores because there really aren't that many anymore. So we have a different approach to music. Music is, for us, when I was a teenager, music was something you saved up to buy a record and you bought it and you listened to it over and over. Now, music is your automatic subscription to Apple Music or Spotify gets deducted from your credit card, and you just go on and all this music is there. So it's a different approach. It's a different mindset, I think, to the way we look at music. And if you compare people who prefer streaming music to preferring listening to the music they own, it's a similar kind of a mental state, an approach, a way of looking at just the concept of music.
I think that by the very nature of owning music, you've automatically curated it to some degree.
Yes,
because you've committed to it with your dollars at some level. Maybe it was a casual commitment. Maybe it was a really dedicated. I can't wait for this. I've been waiting for this album for 3 years, but you've committed to it. So I think you're right, because I talk to friends who are into streaming, and they seem to. Yeah, well, I'll put on this playlist, or I'll put on that, or I'll just stream whatever somebody suggested, and it's like, wow, I so seldom do that, and we're about to go down a path that is the topic of another show. So, but before we do wrap it up, I wanted to make sure that we told everybody about a new podcast you're doing that I've only heard the first episode or so, but I'm really excited about, and I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, together with Doug Adams, who is well known for the Apple scripts that he writes for iTunes, I've launched a podcast called The Next Track. And the tagline for the podcast is, it's a podcast about how people listen to music today. So what we wanted to do is discuss not music itself, because we can't pay the licensing to play music clips in the podcast, of course. But we wanted to discuss a bit what I was just saying about how people listen to music, about how they approach music, how they organize it, how they choose it, what they listen to it on, headphones, a stereo, computer speakers, etc. It's a 30-minute podcast once a week. We're recording this just after the second episode came out. So by the time this show, your show goes live, we'll have 4 or 5 episodes. Doug and I are both have a little gray in our hair. So we're from this same age where we grew up with vinyl. And we're approaching this as a way to discuss what one thinks about with music. The point you just made, we just recorded a show about streaming music. And the point you made about people who just, choose a playlist or whatever to stream music, we both tend to talk about people who use music as wallpaper. It's not necessarily bad. I was doing some work today where I put on some music as wallpaper, And in fact, I'll just give it a plug. Moby, who is the artist that's done techno and electronic music, he released 4 hours of ambient music that he calls, I'm just going to find it in my library, Long Ambience 1, Calm Sleep. And you can download this freely from his website. And so I had this on while I was working today. And it's music that was designed for relaxing, or as he says, doing yoga or working. So sometimes you want music as wallpaper and you want to just put a playlist on, the same way we maybe used to put the FM radio on back in the day. But sometimes you want more. You need to organize your music. You want to tag it so you can find it correctly. And so these are the kinds of things we're covering in the podcast.
I have listened to the first episode. I absolutely think it's great, and I have the utmost respect for you and for Doug as well. And so when you announced this, it's like, wow, this is going to be interesting, and I think it's just going to get more interesting. So good job. And
thanks for the plug, and you can find it at thenexttrack.com.
Great, and of course in iTunes podcasts and anywhere else you can find podcasts. So let's see, it's McElhearn.com.
McElhearn.com, indeed.
For your blog, the iTunes guy on Macworld.
On Macworld.
And the topic here has been Take Control of iTunes 12, the FAQ, version 1.2. Got it?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, I got it all. Kirk, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for the time.
Thanks for having me again.
We'll see you.
Bye.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. We'll be back with more soon. We hope you like the changes to iTunes. If you do, let us know. If you don't, let us know, because maybe we can analyze something and tell Apple what they should do, as if they would listen. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes, links to subscribe, and to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud, the MacVoices blog, the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and on MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard that helps you do more with your Apple tech. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.